Spenmo on the show sheet came up with a very, very good question. And I think it's the $64,000 question for Lions fans out there.
It's a very specific number.
What's that?
So that's a very specific number.
It's an old person show.
Oh, okay.
I was told. Spenmo wanted to know, and Gabby, I'll go to you first on this one. Flat out, bottom line, did the Lions do enough to address the defense in the draft? As we've let all this settle, put you on the spot, did they do enough? Right here, right now.
Going into this year, I think they did enough. I think they did enough for where they were at going into the draft. Do I think it is going to be enough moving forward?
Okay.
But I think it is a good start for addressing what they needed to this year.
Because I wonder about that. And Real Cream of Wheat says, I don't think so. And I guess the question, what it boils down to, Matt, is, for me, I had two simple requests going into the draft. You guys know it well. Number one, don't give up 300 yards of rushing in a half against a team. Number two, make every team you play this year punt at least once. Those were because they both happened in the opposite direction last year and ended up costing you a playoff berth. I don't know how I feel about it. Even now, like as I recreate, I'm warming up to the Jack Campbell thing. I'm told that he's going to contribute, especially, against the run and things like that. Right here, right now, did they do enough to you?
I don't think so. At least that's what my gut's telling me. What I do think is that the draft selection, what Brad Holmes did to get Broderick Martin, giving up 3 picks to go get him, I think it both tells you what he feels about that player, which is probably higher than what other GMs around the NFL feel. I also think it shows the level of confidence he has in the defensive line developing from last year. We've got these guys like Buggs and McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson, James Houston, even Benito Jones coming into building out that defensive line with John Scott Jr., their new defensive line coach. I think they feel that those guys are going to take a much bigger step than maybe we all believe. And so prioritizing the defensive tackle spot, which is something I thought needed to be addressed early. I think a lot of people did. Prioritizing that wasn't as much of a priority as we thought. And I think he went to Jack Campbell to solidify that a little bit, but I don't know. My gut is telling me right now that they haven't.
WoodwardSports.com chat poll, did the Lions do enough to address the defense? Yes, no, or should have drafted Grandpa Joe? No, because it's apparent that character is important.
That's a good point.
I think one thing we know about the Lions, Spenmo, is character's important. And if character's important, I believe Grandpa Joe was never on their draft
Never
board.
on the board. He's a guy that abandoned his family. He's a guy that, you can't trust him. He probably lied in his interviews, like he lied about the fizzy lifting drink. Never on the board.
Never on the board. Daniel Bridger at WoodwardSports.com chat thread. I think the moves Holmes made so far in the offseason shows the faith he has in last year's starters and the improvements they made towards the end of the season. And Daniel, look, like my kind of answer to the question I just went around the room and asked is along those lines, because I feel as though when you look at the people that were coming back because I was driving the Jalen Carter bandwagon. If I wasn't driving, I was definitely sitting shotgun. I was working the GPS, all of it. For me, I was on that train also. I wanted to see something on the interior. They addressed a little bit later on, as you talked about, but still through all that, I do believe, and this one took a minute to kind of go back and recreate it and see where everything was. As I looked at it, I've come to that conclusion too, Daniel, where, the Josh Pascals and bringing Buggs back and Kaminsky, that's everyone's favorite stat, right? They were 9-3 when Frank Kaminsky played. So, I mean, maybe he does feel that. I think that he honestly thinks we're good. We get guys, and the injury... the injury thing sways back and forth, right? You'll lose some guys this year that you weren't planning on losing, that you didn't lose last year. You'll get some guys back from last year that you didn't necessarily have. I think when you boil it all down, he does trust the depth he has at the defensive line. I do.
I agree, and I think that's why he waited till the end of the third round to go get Broderick Martin.
Yes.
I agree.
And it was a lot, too. It was a lot. Cujo Bob says, you don't draft Jalen Carter because his coaches hated him. LOL. I wouldn't go that far. I think that they enjoyed, national titles and things like that.
Having the best defense in football.
100, top 3-round draft picks off the defense. I think that's a little aggressive. Real Cream of Wheat says Grandpa Joe was driving the car that Jalen Carter got busted in for speeding. Yeah, and he said he wasn't even at the scene.
Yep.
It's the kind of guy he is.
Yeah, he said he was bedridden.
Gabby, do you get that vibe when you're down in Allen Park? Like when you hear the conversation move towards defensively, and you were there for everything. You were there 24/7 during the draft weekend. And I know the question came up, and it was probably phrased multiple ways, where people asked and said, do you feel like you did enough? Why did you pass on certain guys? Which is another way of saying, do you feel you did enough, and all that kind of stuff. When the conversation went that way, did you get that vibe? Did you get that feeling where it's kind of along my thought, where we're kind of cool with the guys we got in the room? Did you get that or not?
100%. Going into the draft, Holmes touched on the sophomores. He touched on the sophomores in the defense.
Was it one of those things, too, where he went out of his way to bring that up, or he just took advantage of a lane that was given to him?
It was a question asked, and
Okay.
he went down that path, but he specifically called out individuals by name, and he touched on how confident he felt going into the draft. And obviously this is one of those things that you look at it and you're like, hindsight's 20/20. Obviously he brought them up, and now you look at our draft picks and you're like, okay, so he is really confident in them. He does believe in the people that he has in place, and he seemed very cool as a cucumber coming out of the draft. It went exactly the way that he wanted it to. Was there some adjustments? Yes, but he did say going into the draft there needed to be flexibility. They had to be flexible. He was prepared to be flexible because it was a different draft. He kept saying that over and over and over again, and that they would take the best players for them. And I think Holmes did just that.
Tim France says, hey, Grandpa Joe's from Willy Wonka, you bozos. So there's out there, too. For those of you that don't know, we're big anti-Grandpa Joes. Maybe the most villainous villain in the history of movies.
He's up there.
That guy was a dick,
It's
man.
like Grandpa Joe, Hannibal Lecter.
Absolutely.
At least he's got a code. Like Grandpa Joe just does whatever he wants.
Yeah, dude. And he doesn't care.
Because remember, he's got a golden ticket. Remember when he took over the song, it's not Charlie wanted it, I'm riding his coattails, it's I've got a golden ticket.
And no, Grandpa Joe, you didn't go buy the chocolate bar and open it up. You did not have a golden
You're
ticket.
too busy eating stewed cabbage in your bed like a chump.
Like a chump, not contributing to the bottom line. Meanwhile, Charlie's out there selling papers all day long.
Yeah.
Well, think about this. Charlie's mom is so despondent by Charlie's despair that she sings a song called Cheer Up Charlie and goes out of her way at work. And she doesn't even get the invite. It's Grandpa Joe who's like, I've got the golden ticket. You don't got shit.
He's a terrible person.
Terrible.
God, man. Sandy, who's here in the house today, says Grandpa Joe's a sweet old grandfather that took Charlie to the chocolate factory. Joe loved his grandchild. No, Sandy. Grandpa Joe loved Grandpa Joe.
Yeah.
And that is it, and that is all. Grandpa Joe had no love for anybody else in that house. All he cared about was himself. Dude's a dick, bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. Terrible human being.
The end of his life was coming. You can't blame him. He wanted to live out his dreams.
At Charlie's expense.
Yeah.
Charlie still got to live out his dreams too, to an
At
extent.
Charlie's expense. Charlie was rewarded for being a good person. Grandpa Joe just took advantage of a situation like the dick that he is.
And none of those other chaperones didn't?
No.
Oh.
Absolutely not.
Violet's mom?
Yeah, but Violet was like they were properly connected.
At least Violet's mom produced for her family and didn't pretend to be bedridden until he gets a gold ticket.
When you start saying, Gabby, let's not do that. Let's not start stacking up resumes of everybody else because you know how that's gonna end.
It'd be fair to just do a little bit of a comparison.
Grandpa Joe made eye contact with Augustus when he was drowning in a river of chocolate.
Let
Made
a
eye
child
contact.
drowned.
Yeah, and if he had a cigarette, would have just dropped it on the ground and stepped on it and turned around and walked away.
Didn't he encourage Charlie to drink the fizzy juice?
Yeah,
to
yeah,
make
it
him
was
full?
all his idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's take a drink. Nobody's looking. Let's stay behind.
Yeah. No question about it. Tim France says Violet needed to lay off the We're not going down that road, Tim France. They're children, for Christ's sake. What's wrong with some of you guys out there, man?